Hello everyone, this is Titus from cgcookie.com, here to bring you part 2 of gun concept design for production. In this tutorial, we will be focusing on detailing and refining our silhouette from part 1 to further create interest in our gun concept. Let's get started. Alright, here we are back in Photoshop. These 3 thumbnails were from the first part of the tutorial. Immediately, as you can see, I'm starting to just go back and grabbing chunks from the first silhouette to put into this third one. Still not too satisfied with the silhouette shape, and I'm going to grab another chunk over here and just trying to make it a little bit more interesting. I can't stress enough how important it is to make your silhouette where you want it to be. This is basically your foundation to your final, and once you have a good silhouette, you can pretty much coast through the final of this project. And I can honestly say that this gun was probably one of the quicker guns that I've created. I think it took in total 3 hours to make from start to finish with the silhouettes, which is pretty quick, I'd say, because the silhouettes took an hour. And this part, I think, took an hour as well. This was sped up 3x, by the way, if anyone's wondering. And I think generally 3 hours for one gun is pretty quick. You know, you think about how many hours are in a day, like in a work day. It ends up being pretty time consistent. One method I like to do when I have my silhouettes and I want to start working on refining the silhouettes is I like to put them all on top of each other and then crop out the area that won't be necessary. And then I just work on one layer at a time. I have the other 2 silhouettes turned off, and this just helps me focus on just one silhouette at a time instead of having all 3 showing at once, just so I can stay focused. As you saw before, I went in really quick and made the pistol grip darker. That just gives me an idea that this is more, it's a little thinner than the rest of the gun. And if you guys don't remember from part 1, to make those straight lines, you, having the brush tool on, you hold shift, and then you click to a certain point, and then you click to another point while the shift is still held, and you can create a perfect line from point A to B. Again, just making random details. You can see on the top rail I made some circular shapes. I'm going to get rid of them though. It's a constant process that I go through, but to make those shapes, those circle shapes, you just press F5 to get into the brush preset menu, and I do have a hard brush, so I changed the spacing on it to, I think, in the hundreds, really, or whatever is satisfying. And I did use the gradient tool to kind of just throw in some form on the barrel part over there. It's not realistic. It's just an easy way for me to kind of tell myself that this should be some sort of shape. You'll see in the final that I will start using just some solid shapes. It's just the way I work. I know it's not really realistic lighting. It looks like it's more curved than just a angular shape. I mean, that can also depend on the lighting too, but I always tend to keep my lighting on my guns top down. And I threw an ejection port in there, again with the gradient tool. This gun was more of like a that used bullets, but the third silhouette that I'll be working on next will be a railgun. Over here I have a layer set to the opacity jitter to kind of get some shadow shapes in there, just to tell myself that the barrel is see-through, or you can see through these little cutouts in the gun and the barrels behind it. Again, these are just just hints for myself, so that when I do get into the final, I know what's going on, and I don't confuse myself. And over here, I'm just refining that edge with just a darker color to kind of signify that there's like a little drop shadow in there. Again, adding some shapes. As you can see, it's a constant back and forth of me erasing and adding in detail. You definitely want to spend the time doing that now in these silhouettes, or in silhouettes in general, because you don't want to waste time, again, going into the final. If you go straight into the final without doing the silhouettes, you'll pretty much have these problems. I guarantee it, unless you're really good at drawing guns. But it's a constant battle, really, to try and make something interesting. Last thing you want to do is just waste time, especially if it's for something in production. So definitely spend time on these silhouettes. And again, the first silhouette I did on part 1, those first batch of silhouettes, it did take an hour. And even though those were pretty simple looking, it's a lot of involvement that you have to kind of put into it to make it look interesting. And these are still silhouettes to an extent. I'm just throwing in some detail. This is just a different kind of silhouettes where you're just trying to put in some detail in it to make it look more interesting. And essentially, these are just used to be a blueprint for a final. All of this will be replaced eventually in the final. Just detailing up this scope part here. There's a cool trick you can do when you're drawing a straight line. So to kind of clearly explain this, when you have the brush tool selected and you click on an area and you hold shift, and if you were to drag either right or horizontally or vertically, it'll make a straight line. And if you let go shift, it will actually jump around a little bit, so you can kind of get some sporadic shapes in there too. And it helps sometimes with designing. I do that a lot. And if you did spend some time on your silhouette, maybe just putting in some little cuts here and there, just erasing out little chunks, it'll kind of give you some sort of basis to where to actually add in these lines, these construction lines, I guess. Because if you think about it, how these guns are created, they're not all one solid chunk right off the bat. They're not just molded into a perfect gun. They all have different parts that are eventually, either screwed on or welded on together. So having these little cutouts in your silhouette can kind of give you an idea of where to drop in these lines. I was kind of thinking that this bottom part would be where you put in the ammo. It's not really functional considering the ejection ports on the back. But again, these are sci-fi guns, so just go crazy with them. Really, you kind of have some landmarks in there, but there can be some more sophisticated animations that go along with this that kind of explain how this gun really functions. But the goal for the concept artist is not to really, I'm not going to say that you're not supposed to worry about animation. There are definitely times where, your art director may say, this is a tier 2 object. Some companies like to label either characters, NPCs, or objects depending on tiers. Sometimes these objects are not really necessarily shown a lot, so that'd be a tier 3. And the animation shouldn't really be too crazy on these because you're just going to be wasting resources on something that you could be putting on a tier 1 object, which is maybe a main character or the main character's gun. Again, just putting in some shapes. This part is pretty boring, but it's definitely necessary. So on to this, the third one. And again, there were some cutoff points in there that I thought, would be a good uh, starting point for just some random details, some lines, and again, putting lines on certain different points makes it seem like it was constructed in pieces instead of a whole. And I mean, if it was constructed in a whole, part, I wouldn't be doing any of this. I just maybe put in some lighting in there and try and worry about the form more so than these kind of cuts and divots. One thing I like to do whenever I have a line, putting in a thicker line within that line, it makes it look a little bit more interesting. And you can also just grab the main color of the gun and try and fill up that line a little bit. Just put in some detail. Doesn't really have to make sense. There could be a reason for it. You just want to try your best to just make it interesting. Again, using my little shortcut to duplicate layers, Control J, definitely helps with duplicating shapes and throwing them around. And then going back and forth in the hue saturation to make certain parts darker. And even now, I'm still going back and cutting out some parts of the silhouette just to make it a little bit more interesting, and trying to get some more line work in there because I want equal amount of detail at certain points, towards the back, just so it doesn't seem like this part is lacking. Putting in, you'll see me do that a lot, is putting in some like diagonal lines within the gun. Those could possibly be some sort of heat dissipating mechanic of the gun, but just putting it in there kind of gives it some sort of detail, some interesting shapes. You'll hear me say that a lot, and it does get annoying, but it's all about those interesting shapes. That's what it is for the silhouettes. Again, making a thicker line within a thinner line gives it some more interest. That bottom part eventually got deleted in the final. Just didn't really work. It didn't look sci-fi enough. For now, vertical or diagonal lines are winning it, hands down. This is where I start touching a little bit in the front, and I quickly just throw in a huge chunk of color just so I can quickly make some interesting shapes. I was using the polygonal lasso tool. You can alternate between the lasso tools by hitting Shift L. L is the standard hotkey for the lasso tool, and if you hit Shift L, it will toggle or cycle through the different lasso tools. So it's just a quick, easy way to keep up workflow. More diagonal shapes. I don't know what is with them. They look so cool. And these lines over here, I basically just went to all of those. I added a line that connected to all those points within that gun. It's kind of an easy landmark to go off of to add a line in. And again, changing the value on some of these things to make it seem that it's going inside the gun more. Give it a little bit of form so that when I go do the final, I have something already for me to work off of, and I can kind of see where this stuff should be lighted. Maybe some antennas will work on the scope. You'll see me zoom out a lot. And then that's just me looking at the whole gun end itself. And as you can see, I wasn't satisfied, so I got rid of it, but I still kept it. You know, recycling parts or shapes when you're doing these kind of things also help with workflow and just keeps you at a speedy pace. This is where a Cintiq would have come in handy for sure. There's multiple ways you can make these arcs. You can simply make a line, a thick line, and then using the transform tool and right-clicking on it, you can go to warp, and you can make a kind of curved line. I haven't really had too much success with it in the past, so I don't normally use it a lot. I just kind of eyeball it. And again, this is just a silhouette, so I can go back and refine it later when needed. But doing that was just to kind of give that scope a little bit more depth because it did look a little flat. And then the gradient tool again to kind of show that this part is angled inward to the gun, giving it more depth. And those lines kind of help sell that this chunk is separated from everything else. It's also another neat trick to use. And again, the gradient tool wasn't the smartest thing to use just because the lighting is incorrect, but going into the final, it's just for me to remind myself that this is what I was thinking when I was doing the silhouette. So thicker lines within thinner lines. Maybe duplicate it. Nope. This is where it kind of slows down a little bit. You know, this bottom part over here, I'm kind of getting a little hesitant on what I should be doing. You know, I can tell it's being problematic. So, you know, eyeballing or looking around on other shapes that I have already can kind of help me get away from it. This is where I wanted the gun to load into. I had an idea where that bottom part would fold out and you'd slip in the ammo in there. This is a railgun, so there wasn't a need for an ejection port. As you know, railguns are electrically, they shoot shells, I guess is the way they call them. They shoot basically bullets instead of the cartridges out of a gun using electrical or electricity, magnets. Cleaning up my edge work a little bit. Sometimes I get carried away when I work on one layer and things get a little messy, so I like just to see how I'm doing with everything. This is where I go back and forth, seeing how much I actually wanted that part to go in. And I changed the background color a little bit just to see how everything else was following along. The background color was pretty dark as of now, so as you can see, some colors are blending in a little bit and they're not working well. Right now I just have an opacity brush throwing in some quick values to get some more form, show that some of these shapes are not necessarily hard edge, maybe they're more smooth, especially for the grip and the buttstock. Alright, so here is where I make a breakthrough in my design, just making a little circle. And the way how I made that circle was I used the marquee tool, shortcut M, and I used the circle marquee tool. And if you just make a circle holding shift to make a perfect circle and you go to edit, you can add a stroke to it. So you make the circle with the marquee tool and you go to edit, stroke, and you have a choice of how thick you want the circle to be in pixels and what color you want it to be. And that way you can make yourself a perfect circle. And definitely helps with these with guns and mechanical parts, because sketching them in with my Wacom tablet, it's not a Cintiq, and even with a Cintiq, I can't probably draw a perfect circle to save my life. So using these kind of tools definitely help making mechanical objects look look a lot more realistic. And this is the final. It definitely came a long way from part 1, and hopefully in part 3 you can kind of see how long it takes for some of these finals to be created. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Stick around for part 3. Definitely leave me any comments or feedback that you guys have. I love answering questions that anyone has, and any feedbacks you guys have to make the experience better. So thank you.